Yesterday, we talked a lot about the two-party system and like why we're stuck with two parties and like the good sides and the bad sides of the two-party system. But today, we're going to go back through the US's history and just kind of make sure that we understand how the two-party system has operated from time to time. So we'll eventually get to Republicans and Democrats, but we're going to see what the parties were like before Republicans and Democrats. And then we really need to pay attention about how Republicans and Democrats have changed. Our objective today, we want to make sure that we're able to describe the development of the two-party system in the United States. So like I said, we're going to be going back and tracing what those two parties have been, how they developed and all that, how they've changed. And we want to make sure that today we're able to explain how the party has linked people to the government over time, especially in today's party system. So how did we end up in the coalitions that we're in? So today we'll be answering the question, how did the political parties develop? First, let's take a look at our first two political parties. So we're going to look at how the first parties developed. You might recognize these folks here. This is Thomas Jefferson on the left and Alexander Hamilton on the right. So these are the two guys that really kind of spearheaded the first development of political parties because they presented opposite philosophies for what the Constitution ought to be like and what a government should look like. So let's take a look at how the first parties developed here in the United States. Part of the reason that we have two political parties instead of a whole bunch presenting different ideas is that our first big political debate was a yes or no question. Do you think we should replace the Articles of Confederation with the Constitution? So it really turned into one group of people saying yes and one group of people saying no. Hamilton is the driver behind trying to attempt to sway people to vote for the ratification. He helped organize leaders and he helped craft messages and stuff like that. So he's putting together a coalition of people that are helping spread his ideas and his reasons for ratifying the Constitution. And this basically is what forms the Federalist Party. He's doing all the things that a political party does. He's organizing people and he's trying to get them to vote together so that he can win an election with his ideas. The result of Hamilton's efforts basically become the Federalists. So the Federalist Party was a group of people that tended to advocate for a stronger national government. They thought that the national government should play a much bigger role, particularly in the economy. That national government could be making decisions about roads and things like that that would help the economy grow. One of the things they advocated for was a national bank. And these are all things that aren't really in the Constitution. So they're advocating, that this is their idea of what the government ought to be like. The second president, John Adams, is the first president to represent a political party, and he was the first Federalist elected as president of the United States. He didn't make it to a second term, but this shows how successful the Federalists were. The Federalists, they pushed their message, they organized people, and they ended up with enough electoral votes to make their candidate the first president that was elected representing a political party. If one side's going to organize, the other side better organize in order to stay competitive. So the anti-federalists get together and basically form a political party that opposes the attempts of federalists to win offices. And this becomes the Democratic Republicans. We really call these Jeffersonians as we look back in history. But their philosophy is to advocate for less government intervention, especially less government involvement in the economy. So they want to make sure that there's more freedom in the economy and that people's freedom from the government is protected. And so they end up mostly representing small farmers. This made them really popular in the South and made them really popular in rural areas. So Adams became the second president, and he's the first one with a political party. But the next four ended up being Democratic Republicans. Now, we have to remember, since they were popular in the South, the Electoral College gave advantages to candidates from slave states because of that 3/5 compromise. So those states had more electoral votes than they should have, but the next four presidents following John Adams were representative of the opposite political party, including his own son, John Quincy Adams. In any two-party system, eventually one party is going to become so detached from public support that they just lose over and over and over again and eventually go away. And that's what happened to the Federalists here. They really blew it on the War of 1812. They were supported. It was really unpopular among people that supported the Federalists because they had such economic ties to the UK and all that. So they were unsuccessful anyway. And when America won the War of 1812, it made them very unpopular with everybody. So in 1816, that was the last time they even attempted to win the office of president. And so the years following this, you may remember from history, is goofy. We call it the era of good feelings and say that there was general consensus in politics. But really, what that means is in the years following the War of 1812, we hadn't quite had a second party come along to rival the Democratic Republicans yet. So what's important about the first party system that we dealt with is that this introduced the idea of elections based around the two-party model. So you have two candidates presenting like opposite ideas of how the government ought to work. The Federalists developed the idea of a nominating convention. So that's something that we still use today. So they had a way to choose the best candidate to run. And both parties created the idea of campaigning. So, going place to place to try to organize voters and get the most votes. So campaigning began to become very organized and began to become like the role of the party is helping run the campaigns to win the elections. So our second party system comes along in the middle of the 1800s. We have a second party, the Whigs, show up to represent opposition to the Democrats, but the Democrats also changed, and a lot of that we're going to attribute to Andrew Jackson and the way that his party, that his group approached campaigning, tried to reach out to all the voters here. So you'll see some messaging here. They talk about Andrew Jackson as a hero of wars, so they're like really building him up. At the same time, they're trying to make him seem just like you. He's a man of the people. And so this is really a big change in how the political parties approached elections. So first, let's take the Democrats. We're going to deal with Andrew Jackson here, a candidate in 1824 and 1828. So his campaigns really are what turned political parties into the like modern political party. It's a long time ago, but they're doing the same stuff today. So he brought together instead of just like small groups of like educated people that were voting, he really brought together wide coalitions of different groups. So he was able to get the support of Southerners and Westerners. He also tried to get the support of immigrants and get the support of farmers. So what they did here is they brought a bunch of groups of people that shared some interest and convinced them that by uniting behind one candidate, they would have the voting power to get what they wanted. So here's where we just change the Democratic Republicans to just the Democrats. They're trying to appeal to the masses here. So they change their name to something that's more simple to understand, like everyone understands democracy. So this is an attempt to appeal to the masses. We never really talk about Martin Van Buren because he doesn't seem like the most important man in the world, but he was actually really good at politics. He was really like he was a vice president for Jackson and ended up being a president himself, and he was really good at bringing the party together on a national scale, like showing the South what they have in common with the immigrants of the North. So they were able to do that by focusing on the opposition. Right? It's easier to unite people against a common enemy, and that's what Van Buren understood. So the party really advertised itself as, against an opposing force, and that brought people together. They also branded themselves as the party of the common man. Just like with Jefferson, they're advocating for small government. They're advocating for the protection of states' rights. They're trying to show that Andrew Jackson, despite being like a, super rich, huge landowner guy, the guy basically founds Memphis because he gives some land away. They're trying to portray him as just like you and me, regular old people who can vote. So the party here is really united around states' rights, and what really brings the party together is the states' rights to make their own decision about slavery. So the Democrats at this point are a very pro-slavery party. The opposition party that forms here is what we call the Whigs. So the Whigs advocate, just like the Federalists, for more national government in the economy. So you'll see that the two-party system is basically always giving us a battle of small government versus big government. There were big leaders in the Whig Party like Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, but they really didn't do very well in getting the presidency. They would be able to use a military hero or something like that. Like there are a couple Whig presidents, but in general they didn't really win at the presidential national voting level. Their coalition was mostly northern industrialists and wealthy people in the South. So this was a party of people in cities in the north and wealthy people in the south. So again, a coalition that doesn't seem like it has a lot in common, but they unite behind a common interest to try to defeat the Democrats. This party system also came to an end, especially as we approached the Civil War. Slavery began to dominate all the politics. And so that was always the issue that people were talking about. So that caused the Whigs to split up, since the Whigs were a coalition of rich people in the South who definitely wanted to continue slavery, and people in the North who were industrialists who didn't want slavery. So the Whigs basically broke up here. And then there were growing events that caused a very small party that was an anti-slavery party, the Republican Party, was able to start to get a lot of support. They were able to bring together all the support from groups that were opposed to slavery, so they were drawing support away from the Whigs. So by 1860, the Whigs were gone. The Whigs had broke up their own party. They tried to restart again, but the Whigs stopped running candidates in 1860. So this second two-party system that we had, this was different because the parties were built from the bottom up. That means the parties were built on the support of regular people. They relied on the support of voters. This was not just led by the elites, trying to dictate what politics would be like, but this actually was based on what the people wanted. In this time period, both parties ended up using nominating conventions, big national conventions that were, covered in the media of the time. And this is the first time that regular people, like everyday, just working people, started to identify themselves with political parties. And so this is a big development for American politics. All right, so there's our first two political systems, and that takes us up to the Civil War. So, the first half of the United States lifespan here. And in this time, we have different parties than we're used to today. But we're going to get to the party system that we have now, which is the Democrats versus Republicans. But we're going to see that they were very different parties to start with than what they are today. And we'll start to see how parties change their ideas over time instead of just giving up and quitting like we saw with the Federalists and the Whigs.